morning. So one of the things that we're doing through this series is obviously we're going to work through this Hebrews chapter 11 and talk about some of these faithful saints from the Old Testament, and we'll learn from them, and we'll learn from their lives and be encouraged about the way we should and should not live. But it's not just Old Testament saints. Like, those aren't the only people who have ever lived faithful to God. And so the other part of this series is we're going to kind of bring up and have a few people from within our church. Actually, we need 9 people. Is that 9? That's 9, right? 9 people, because we got 10 weeks of this series. 1 week's going to be something special. But 9 different people, and we have so far 3, right? So that means we need 6 more, right? Okay? All right, you guys are catching up. But we want to hear from people within our body, within our congregation, so that I am good at math. Within our congregation, so that we get this idea of this idea of faith wasn't just something that happened thousands of years ago. This idea of faith is something that happens today. This idea of faith is something that God's people are still living out right now in this moment. And so today, for our hometown or our family's faith, we're going to hear from Ron Hevelo, who's going to come share with us a little bit this morning. And we kept the kids in here, stay in here for a few more minutes, and then when he's finished, then he'll dismiss the kids, or I'll dismiss the kids. The handheld is there. Do you want to dismiss the kids, or do you want me to do it? All right, I'll dismiss the kids when he's done.
Would.
Okay.
Amen. Let me see if I can get this back up. When he asked me, I had to go way back. When he said it was just recent, well, no, we're going back 60-some years when I accepted Christ in a little church about 3 blocks over. And my grandfather he's the patriarch of my life. And when I started to think about Jesus and going with him and my brother, sometimes we'd go down to Maryland, we'd end up in a church camp. And we'd be on the outskirts. You know, the kids were allowed to run. We were allowed to run. But for some reason, we'd start kind of getting close to the tabernacle. And just by, I would say, osmosis, you know, we started to hear a little bit more about Christ. And by Grandpa just taking us there. But he would, every time we would go somewhere, he would pray. And he would write in his little diary about stuff. And I learned from that. I learned from what he taught by just modeling. And it says I'm supposed to read this one, which I was really pretty much touched this in Hebrews where we're at. It's Hebrews 6. It says, and without faith, it's impossible to please God because anyone who comes to him must believe he exists. And I thought to myself, wow, isn't that amazing to know that? And I realized that's what my faith is about, is to know that he is always there, no matter what I'm going through. And within the last couple of years, I've gone something through through COVID, which was not exactly next to death, but it was close. And then very recently, Renee came through a tough one. So knowing that he's there is a very important thing to us. At least I know between Renee and I, because one thing that I said to Pastor Scott that I was going to bring about is the fact that by trusting in him and having faith in him, we started tithing probably better than 30 years ago, hun, probably, easily, give or take, I would think. But we know it works for that. And I believe in that. I believe that he takes, just like Abel gave his first fruits, you know, and God blessed that for him. And then with that, and us just, the second, and I don't want to use the R word, but it's something that actually strengthened my faith too, because I believe that what's coming and what we're, not necessarily the bad stuff, and I know the bad stuff's going to come. It's going to be in the Great Tribulation. But I know there's something so much better past that. And to have faith in knowing that, and knowing that you're going to be with him, be with our Savior. You know, I have a whole mess of things I wrote down here, and I'm thinking, this is not what it's about. It's about knowing that someday we will be able to walk up to Jesus and hug him and see his scars and see everything that he gave us. I mean, if you want any other proof, step outside our doors here and look at nature. There's no way that could have came but from a creator. Yes, Mike, that is so true. So that's my testimony, that through my life, it's been that strong in my life that I'm happy that I didn't get 2,000 words in. So, Pastor, if you want to come forward.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so humble now.
Yeah.
And you're going to let me not stop, are you?
Oh, no, I'm here, so now it's
okay. I can go. Okay.
All right, kids, you can be dismissed. I do want to highlight kind of two things from his story that he shared. First of all, just so you know, the R word is revelation, right? I didn't want you trying to figure out, well, what is the word he's not saying? We don't use that word because it gets Ron a little riled up, you know. Ron gets riled up with revelation. That's how we remember it, ours, right? You guys remember your reading, writing, arithmetic? It's Ron gets riled up with revelation. The other thing that I wanted to say is that so he shares a little bit about, you know, his faith testimony, where it comes from, but the part of his story was, you know, it came from my grandfather. It came from someone else's influence in my life. And I think every one of us has that. It's someone that has influenced our life in some way, shape, or form. And then here's the other part. You are influencing someone else's life in some way, shape, or form. You are either the reason they are or are not a believer in Jesus Christ. You're the reason they are or are not someone who is faithful to the Lord. And so I would just encourage you to kind of consider that in your daily interactions and things. And so I'm glad that we're able to kind of hear from some of the faith within our own family here. And I'm looking forward to the next couple of weeks and who else is going to share and just to get everybody, just to see this lived out faith in 2025. It's one thing to go 6,000 years ago, whatever. It's a whole nother thing to go, no, this is current. This is in the world we live in, that they're able to remain true and live that out. So it should be a good couple weeks. I'm looking forward to the rest of the series to do that. So today is week 2 of this summer series, Citizens of Heaven. And the main idea behind this idea is that while we may be citizens of this country, or we have people on occasion that watch from countries around the world, I don't know if you knew that or not, but they log in and check around every now and then. But even though we may live in whatever country you're in, you as a follower of Christ are first and foremost a citizen of another place. The writer in Hebrews says it this way. In Hebrews 11, 13 through 16 puts it this way. He said, all of these people died in faith, without having received the things that they were promised. However, they saw them and they welcomed them from afar, and they acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. They were longing for a better country, for a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And so the idea of this whole series kind of takes one aspect of this text, that God gave them a vision. God gave these people a vision for a far-off day while they were living in the present. He says, while you're in this moment, here's what can come later on. Here's what's available. Here's what's out there for later if. And these people that we read about through Hebrews, through the Old Testament, they were convinced that that vision was not only a good vision, that it was not only this is the best of life, but also it was worth giving their entire selves to. It was worth giving their lives over for. And then lastly, they relished in the fact that no matter what land they lived in, no matter how fruitful it was or how barren it was, they were to consider themselves as aliens. This world we live in is not supposed to be home. We're not supposed to be comfortable in this. We live here, but we should long for something later, and we'll get into a little bit of that later on. And so those beliefs, those 3 things, they affected the way that they lived. They understood and they lived by the fact that faith looks forward to eternity, like we're looking forward to the future, right? Okay, all right, good. But faith also looks forward to today. Faith looks forward to the eternity, but it also lives in today. It also gets lived out in these moments. And so each and every one of these men that we're going to read about, that we're going to discuss over the next couple of weeks, they looked forward to the promise that God had given them, but they did so while being faithful and obedient in their day. Looking forward to this, but living faithfully and obedient to him right here in this moment. And that's what they're all about. And when we read through these stories, I don't want you to get wrapped up in the miraculous things that they did. Some of them did some pretty extravagant things. Last week, Abel, maybe not so much, but maybe a little bit, who knows. But I don't want you to get wrapped up in these miracles or the amazing feats that they did. What I want you to see is their everyday, simple, lived out faith. The easy stuff to do, easy, relative, the easy stuff to do. These heroes, where they were ordinary men and women, they struggled, they stumbled, they did some really dumb things on occasions, and they failed often. But they held on to these three truths. And you actually find these truths throughout Hebrews 11. It says that God was real, that he would keep the promises that he made to them, and that seeking him was worth the effort. That's what they lived out. This is the way we're going to live our lives. Last week we talked about Abel, and we talked about Cain, maybe a little more as the example of what not to do. But it was about Abel, and the testimony from Hebrews is that Abel offered a better sacrifice. If you remember, it was the best and the first. Abel offered the best and the first, and then Cain did eventually the leftovers. And then by faith, he was commended, Abel was commended as righteous. And what we learned from his life is that God doesn't care. It's not so much about the type of sacrifice, but the faith behind the sacrifice that you've given. And it means absolutely your finances. That's part of it. This idea of tithing and being faithful to that is part of it. But it's also your time and your talent, but it's also, more importantly, your whole being. Everything that you are day in, day out. Every moment of your life. Paul writes it to the church of Rome. He says, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. He mentioned the verse that without faith it is impossible to please God. It is from Hebrews 11:6. And that idea of pleasing God is what really plays into the character we'll talk about today, the character of Enoch. The very next verse in Hebrews 11, so it's Hebrews 11, verse 4 was Abel, and verse 5 is Enoch. And it says this. It says, by faith Enoch was taken up so that he did not see death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And again, this is a brief synopsis of Enoch's life, but there is a repeated phrase or idea that happens a couple times in there. Did you catch it? It's underlined, so it should be fairly easy, right, if you can catch those things. But it's this idea of taken. He says it over and over and over again. 3 times he says this idea of taken. Taken up, taken away, and taken. And first of all, anytime the Bible says something 3 times, it's probably significant. It's probably something that we should pay attention to. Just like when if you ever got in trouble as a kid. Anybody ever get in trouble as a kid? Right? If they say your name once, if they say your name once, someone get in trouble now, right? Oh, you wait. I got something for you later on. But anyway, so if they call your name once, it's one thing, but they call you repeatedly, or when you get that middle name, like that's a whole other thing, right? You better start listening. And you don't want to have to get something repeated. Didn't you hear what I said? Those types of things right there. So anytime something gets repeated, it's important. You want to pay attention to that. And so this idea of taken is the word kind of transported. Transposed, just kind of transported. It's kind of taken, it's moved from one place to another. It's all of a sudden here, and then all of a sudden not. And so that's what goes on with his life. He wants to make sure there's no mistake that he just eventually died, and then he was in heaven. He's going to know there was a moment where he was, and then he wasn't. And then also I think the writer says this repeatedly these 3 times because it says, obviously, that the friends and family looked for him. Wouldn't you look for someone that was all of a sudden disappeared? You had no idea where they were. They're supposed to be here, and they're not. You're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of energy looking for that individual, especially when you hear how old he was, as we get to in Genesis chapter 5, 4, I can't remember, 5 it is. And so what I think what the writer wants to make clear, as well as this idea, taken is the very important thing, but that he didn't just get lost. He didn't just kind of wander away and somebody's going to find him later on. Like, he wants to make sure that he is not anywhere to be found. They've all looked in all the places that he could be. He's not in any of those places because God had taken him. He's trying to be very clear. This is what's going on here. Enoch was here and then he was not. Absolutely gone. And that sounds really, really remarkable. But I think why God took him is even more remarkable. It wasn't because of his faith. It wasn't because he believed that God would take him, because this is unprecedented. This hasn't happened yet. So his story is Genesis chapter 5. It's shortly after 7 generations after Adam. We don't get any account of that happening yet. There's a second individual later on, but that comes much later. And so he should not have been anticipating this. I'm gonna do what I need to do, and then God's gonna just take me away one day. But that is not what happened. That's not the way that he's living life. And so I think that we have to kind of get into and answering the question and understanding he's taken. That's a big point of it. But he was taken by faith. But before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And I think there's the reason, right? There's the why he was taken. It's clear, right? Because he pleased God. And so I think for us to understand how did he please God, I think that's the thing for us to understand. How did he please God? How did he live life in such a way that he found that he was pleasing to God? That God looked at him and said, in you I am well pleased. And I think to get the rest of his story, to get that idea, to see what's going on, we got to go back to Genesis chapter 5 and then get his whole story. And so here's what it says in Genesis chapter 5. It says, when Jared, which is just another name, was 162 years old, he became the father of Enoch. There's our character, became father of Enoch. When Enoch was 65 years old, he became the father of Methuselah. And after he had become the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. So Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Enoch walked with God. And then he was no more because God had taken him away. And that's it. That's really all we're told about Enoch. It is not much longer than what we read in Hebrews. In fact, most of what we read there in Genesis chapter 5 is just how long he lived and who his family was. And so when you look at that little aspect, you go, that hardly seems worth making it into the Hall of Heroes. That little itty-bitty bit right there. But there is a little phrase in there that hopefully you caught because, well, I said it differently, and secondly, it's underlined, right? So you can catch this idea. You kind of know where it is going. But this little phrase is what makes Enoch unique. Up until this point, again, seventh generation from Adam, every patriarch has had the same thing written about him. You can read back through this chapter in Genesis. Every patriarch has the same thing. He lived, he had kids, he died. Next patriarch, he lived, he had kids, he died. He lived, he had kids, he died. And that happens over and over and over again until you get to Enoch. Once you get to Enoch, he still lived, still says that he had kids, but before he died, there was another statement about him. It says that he walked with God. And the fact that that phrase is reported twice in such a short span of time, just a short span of a couple of verses, it signifies the importance of those words. And in fact, when you read through all of the Bible, you'll get this idea that walking with God is something very, very important. Walking with God is something we're supposed to do as followers of Jesus Christ. Followers walking of Jesus Christ. And so you can see that it gets to start very early from the beginning. But Enoch was different in that he didn't just live and go around his merry way and just kind of go about his merry way and doing what everybody else was doing and then kind of having kids and just doing what everybody did before him, what everybody else was doing. He was different. He was unique. He stood apart because he's the only one that it says he walked with God. And that is what is remarkable about Enoch. It's not the fact that he didn't die. We might go, that is the most amazing thing, but the more amazing thing is the fact that he walked with God. He walked with God in a generation that didn't walk with God. He walked with God around people who didn't think it was a good idea. The way to go was to walk with God. He exhibited this habitual, this consistent, and this constant relationship with God. Even though every moment of every day he lived in a sinful world, he went against the flow. He went against the norm of the society and the world around him, and he chose to walk with God when nobody else would. And because he chose to do that, he was rewarded for it. And he was well rewarded because God took him away, remember? There's the reward he gets for doing that. And so here's the thing that we want. We all look forward to the being taken away, right? We all want heaven, right? I asked you earlier, we said we were pretty emphatic, yes. I think you haven't changed your mind. No, right? We all want that. But we all want the wings, right? We all want to be taken, but how many of us want the walk? You see, there's a much harder question. I want to be in heaven, but I'd rather not have to do all the difficult things right now. I want to be in heaven someday, but I'd rather not have to live any differently right now. Right? Before there were wings for Enoch, there was a walk. There was a way that he lived his life. There was a following after God that was uncommon in the world that he lived in. And so let's think about walking for a while. If you've ever been walking along outside somewhere and someone is kind of walking right at about your same pace, Like Mel and I were just doing this. We were somewhere recently, and we're walking, and someone was walking at our same pace. And like, were they following us? Did you even know? You might have known. I don't know. But we're walking, and then they're at the same pace. And I said, hey, let's just step over to the side, right? And then they move right on past. You've done something like that, right? When you recognize someone is walking with you at your same pace in your same direction, and you don't know them, so you don't want them doing that. And so you change your pace, you change your direction, you speed up, you slow down, you step aside, you pretend you got a phone call, you turn, you go into a store, you do something in order to get them by you. Because we don't want to walk with people that we don't know. We don't want to walk with people that are kind of strangers. Amos even kind of leans into this, the prophet Amos, when he says in Amos 3:3, he says, can two walk together without agreeing where to go? And so he's really getting into the sense that walking is relational. You walk with someone that you're connected to, or that you're at least interested in being connected to. And it doesn't have to be a deep connection, because no relationship starts off deep. It starts off kind of shallow until you begin to walk with, and then you kind of learn from the other one. And so I think that's what we have to recognize with this idea of walking. One part that I think we have to recognize with Enoch's idea of walking. It is incredibly relational to walk with someone. And the other thing that I think we need to recognize when we're walking with someone is that one of you has to match the pace of the other. One of you either needs to speed up or slow down so that you can walk together, right? You're a fast walker and they're a slow walker. How many times have you been with somebody and they're like, why are we running through here? Right? You wore a harness? Okay, all right. I guess you could do that too. The little child leash.
Don't get away.
And that was just last week he's talking about. So there's this idea, right? You have to match the pace. And so what I want us to see in Enoch's case is that he adjusted his pace to God. He walked with God. Right? I think the wording there is significant. He chose to walk at God's pace. He moved at the same pace and the same tempo and the same rhythm and the same step as God. And this was as abnormal, Enoch choosing to walk with God, it was as abnormal for him as it is for us today to walk with God. But that used to be the way that it was. That's the way that we were created. That's the way that we're supposed to be, to have this walking everyday relationship with God. When you read back through creation and you look at Genesis chapter 3, Genesis chapter 2, I think, then you read the account of Genesis 3, that God was walking and looking for Adam. You remember that? He's walking and looking, and then Adam and Eve are hidden. Because by this point, they've taken the fruit, they've sinned, and they know that they're naked. So God is looking for them. He's walking. He's looking for them and calling out to them, and they're hiding from him. And so I think it's very clear that we were created from the very beginning to walk with God, to have connection with him. We were created to have fellowship with our Creator. We were created to be in constant contact with God that loves us. Until sin came in and ruined the relationship, and now we don't walk with him like we used to. And that's the same way it is for us now. Something comes into our relationships, to our lives, and we don't walk with him the way that we're used to. And so not only is walking with God what we were made to do, here's the other part that I think is even more important. It's what we desperately and deeply long for. We ache for fellowship. We ache for relationship with other people. And we look for it in so many different ways. We look for fulfillment in so many different things. However, very few of us ever realize that walking with God not only pleases him, sure, but it also brings the pleasure that we're looking for in our lives. It also gives us the fulfillment that we've been looking everywhere else for. We find all these other places to walk because we're looking for something, and God says it's been here all along. Walking with God is supposed to be the norm, not the exception. In Enoch's day, he was the exception. Of the 7 listed, he's the only one. What about the 7 of us? If I were to put 7 together in groups of 7, how many would be the walkers with God? It was supposed to be, when you read back in Genesis, that he was born, he walked with God, he had kids, he walked with God, and died. That's the way it was supposed to be. That's the way it's clear from creation. This is the way it's supposed to work. But somewhere along the line, that little phrase gets pulled out. Walked with God gets pulled out. And then what happens is the life that we live is we're born, we have kids, or don't, and then we die. We've taken out the most important part of our lives, what's supposed to be in our lives. And then what we do is we walk at our own pace. But the reality is, we're not even walking at our own pace. We're walking at the pace of the world around us, the rat race. And we're just foolish enough, we're just duped enough to go, oh yeah, this is my pace. I'm doing it my way. And we're not. We're doing it the way everyone around us does it. And God is saying, that is not the norm. Walking with God is what is supposed to be the norm. God says, walking with me is what is supposed to be the norm. There is no other way that you will live a fulfilled life walking in your own footsteps, walking in your own way. So the question is, I think as we continue to kind of work through that idea, is how do I walk with God? Right? Here's the next question. How do I walk with God? And then here's the participation point. I want you to read that up there. Right, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, Sherry. All right, I'm pretty sure. I saw a couple other people wording it, but there are a couple other people in here. So let's try it one more time. How do I walk with God? That is a great question. I am really glad that you asked that. Because I think that there are other places in the Bible that kind of lean into that. It kind of tells us how we walk with God, because that's a really good question to God. If walking with God is how we please him, then walking with God is what I need to know how to do. Right? That's what I need to do more of. How can we walk with God? And then Paul gives a really great bit of insight on this. I'm going to read this passage from Galatians kind of really quickly. We'll go through it just a little bit. But Paul gives this really great insight on walking with God. And he says that walking with the Spirit versus, he contrasts it with walking in the flesh. And that's what's going on in Genesis chapter 5. Enoch is walking with God. He's walking in the Spirit. Everyone else is walking in the flesh. They're born, they have kids, and then they die. Enoch is the only one, right? And so this is the exact same thing that he's going on here. And this is what Paul writes. He says, so I say, walk by the Spirit. You can read this later on. Galatians 5, I'm going to read you a bit of it. Galatians 5, 16 through 26 gives you a big list. It's not an inclusive list. It's not the whole list. If you're not like, hey, I don't do these 7 or 8 things, then I'll be good. Or if I do these 7 or 8 things, then I'll be good. It's not a total list. It's just giving you a starting point. You start there, you'll be on your way towards walking with God. But here we go. He says, so I say walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. I think right off the bat, he's saying, here's what you're doing. When you work to gratify the desires of the flesh rather than God's Spirit in you and what he says we should and should not do, then you're walking by the Spirit. You're walking by the flesh, not by the Spirit. For the flesh craves what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. He says they do not want the same things. When you're being obedient to the flesh, you don't want what the kingdom says. This is what needs to happen in your life. That's really simple to figure out. That's really simple to look at your life and go, is this kingdom-minded or is this Scott-minded? Is this him or is this me? Now, what you do beyond that point is a little bit harder. Sure, I'll give you that. But distinguishing which is which isn't really that hard. Flesh craves what is contrary to spirit, spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are opposed to each other so that you do not do what you want. Because if I were to ask you, all every single one of you, so I'm not even going to waste my time, would you rather live by the Spirit? Would you rather live by the flesh? I want to live by the Spirit. I want to do what God wants me to do. And then the next question would be, well, how often do you do that? And the answer would be, not as often as I'd like. I struggle more than I'd like to admit that I do with those things. So that's why I'm not going to ask you that. So you do what it is you don't want to do. And he goes on, he says, those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh. That part of you is done and gone with its passions and its desires. And then he finishes up. He says, since we live by the Spirit, let us walk in step with the Spirit. He gives that same idea. If we say we are of God, if we are of the Spirit, then we walk in step with the Spirit. We pace ourselves to match the God who's walking. We match his rhythm, his tempo, his stride. And I don't think he's sprinting and going, hey, keep up. I think he's going, okay, this is your pace right now? Then we'll walk this pace for right now. But it's you matching his pace. He's pushing you. Walk a little faster, walk a little differently than what you've done. And so what Paul is saying, he's saying that those who walk by the flesh cannot please God. That's what Paul's saying, and that's what the author of Hebrews kind of wants to make sure that you see in the life of Enoch. That walking with God is really, really important. He wants you to see that he wants you to see what happens, what can happen if you will live by faith. And then he wants to say, hey, if you want to live by faith, this is what can happen to you, looking at the life of Enoch. And then he says, I want you to look back at Enoch's life, and I want you to see what brought that out. Because it wasn't just him going, I think God's going to take me one day, I think God's going to take me one day, I think God's going to take me one day, over and over for 365 years. Him being taken was the byproduct of him walking with God. And so then he says, look back at his life. And then what we see when we look back at Enoch's life is it was an exceptional and uncommon life of walking with God. That's what pleases God, and that's what ultimately gets rewarded. So how about you? Here's what we do as followers in today's age, and really every age, right? Here's what we do. We walk to God. That's kind of it. We kind of walk to him. We'll walk where he is, and we'll hang out for a few minutes. We walk to where he is, and we'll listen to him until he says something we don't want to hear, until he says something we don't like. We'll walk to him until we get something we wanted to get from him. We walk to him until, man, I got somewhere else I got to be. I don't. I only have to be here. We walk to him until there's somewhere else that we have to go, and then we get up, and then we walk away. And then we walk back to what's normal. We walk back to what everybody else has been doing all along. We walk back to the rat race and think that's where we're going to find fulfillment. We walk to him and then walk away. And let me show you what this looks like. Maybe for your whole life, maybe for 6 weeks, you have been showing up at church with the goal of walking to him, but not with him. Because that's what you can do when you just, I'm going to make sure I'm at church every Sunday at 10 a.m. We're walking to him. And that's it. That's all you do. I'm not doing the reading. I'm not doing the groups. You know we have some? Not doing any of that stuff. Sunday morning at 10. That's me. That's walking to God and then walking away. And let me tell you what's happening in your life. Maybe not right in this moment, but what's happening in your life is you are inevitably frustrated. Because God, you're frustrated at God because life is not turning out the way that you thought it was supposed to. Something is not going the way in your life that you had it written out to go. You don't have the things that you wanted to have. You don't have the things that you think you deserve to have. But what the writer of Hebrews is trying to get at, what he's trying to give you in Enoch's life, what he wants you to see is the thing that will make you happy, the thing that will bring you joy, the thing that will give you fulfillment, the thing that will give you purpose is walking with God. He is the thing that is most rewarding. There's a statement from the Westminster Shorter Catechism that says this. It says, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Forever doesn't start the day you walk into the pearly gates. Forever is supposed to be now. This is the part of forever for you. And I think this is why the psalmists constantly say things like, all my springs of joy are in you. Where are you finding joy in your life? And this is why they also write, the Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. I'm looking everywhere else for joy. I'm choosing everything else in life, but it's supposed to be the Lord. It's supposed to be God is the one that I find all of those things in. And listen, when you do that, when you live that way, when you walk with God, the reward of faith isn't that you don't experience death. Like that's what we might think. Woohoo. That might be where we want to get at. But the reward of faith is actually God himself. That's the reward of faith. We get to enjoy him now and forever more. Not just, hey, later, God, we'll hang out. We'll have a good time together. Well, I'm about 95. You give me a holler, and we'll hang out then. It's supposed to be now and forever. So then here's the question, right? I want you to kind of think about it. Are you walking to or are you walking with God? Because there's a real difference. Did you show up, kind of hover around him in the group with everybody else while he tells a good story? That's funny. Move on. Or are you saying, I'm going to hang out in this group until Jesus moves, and I'm going to walk with him? There's a huge difference in walking to and walking with. So what God is calling us to do is to let go of whomever and whatever it is that we're trying to keep pace with. And he says, I want you to walk with me instead. That's what he's writing. That's what he's saying. But here's again what I know some of you are thinking, because as I read all this, I had these same thoughts as well. Right? You're worried that when you begin walking with God, you're going to miss something later on that someone who doesn't walk with God has. If I give God 10%, then I'm not going to have 10%. And they do have 10%. And so you're concerned that there might be something better that you're going to miss out on if you decide to walk with God now. How often have you thought, or do we hear, I'm going to kind of do my life the way I want to do it, and I'll come back to God later in life. Man, if that works out that way, I don't know, maybe great. You'll make it by the skin of your teeth. But you missed out on so much more, right? And so we have a greater fear of missing out than we do faith in God. And that's kind of what's going on. And these ideas, your concerns, the things that you're worried about, your FOMO that you have is not new. This didn't start today. You're not the first ones to ever have that. In fact, the letter to the Hebrews is written because these people had the same things that you thought, the same thoughts that you have right now. They wanted to know, is God the way to happiness? They wanted to know, is God the way to fulfillment? They wanted to know, is God going to protect me in all the ways of my life? Is he the only way that I'm going to find salvation? And so they wondered, is following him the way that I'm supposed to live? That's why Hebrews is written. He says, absolutely, this is the way you're supposed to live. So you're not the first ones to have these struggles. That should give you a bit of solace. But then don't look everywhere else and go, well, what is it I should do? Look back to Hebrews. Look back to the examples of faith. Look back to Abel and Enoch and Ron and Karen and whoever sits beside you. Start rubbing some shoulders with some of them. Don't rub their shoulders unless they need a massage, but start hobnobbing with those folks. And you'll learn and see a different way. And so what the writer of Hebrews is saying, he's saying walking with God will not be a disappointment. Walking with God will not be a disappointment. It is worth whatever it takes to walk with him. And then he says there is a reward for having faith and walking with him. And listen, the reward is not that you won't die. To continue on what Ron was saying, the greater reward is that none of us will taste the second death. Some of us might not even taste the first, depends on when he comes. Right? The greater reward is that we will one day be changed in a moment, the twinkling of an eye. The greater reward is that we will one day be caught up to meet with Jesus. The greater reward is that we will one day forever be with our Lord. The greater reward is that we will see with our eyes what today we only see by faith. The greater reward, those are all great. The greater reward, the greatest reward, is that we don't have to wait until later. We can walk in the presence of God today. And so to emulate Enoch, to walk with God ourselves, is to walk the path of godliness. It is to have him as our companion at every moment and in every place. The places where you don't normally bring him, you bring him into. To walk with God is to be the people of God in our day, even if we're the only people. Because no one else gets that reward. Read through that list. Born, had kids, died. Born, kids, died. Born, kids, died. Born, kids, died. You get Enoch, born, walked with God, had kids, walked with God, God took him. The only one that was rewarded, the only one that got the greatest reward was the one that said, I'm going to live differently than everybody has before me, and I'm going to live differently than everybody is around me. And so the story of Enoch's life in Hebrews and in Genesis isn't just there so we'd have something to talk about, so we could have a good picture up on the Bible, so that we'd have a topic to discuss through the summer series of 2025. It is there as an exhortation. It is there as an encouragement. It is there an example to say this is how you should live your lives. You should walk with him all of your days, and you will find joy and fulfillment, and then you will be pleased, and he will be pleased with you. The worship team, you can come up. And so here's where I want you to kind of think. There's lots of questions that I've asked, and here's the last question I want you to lean on, because I hope this is your question now. How does one, pleasing God, faith pleases God, how does one walk? Well, then here's how we do it. Live according to the Spirit, not the flesh. Well, then the next question has to be, well, how do I start? Right? What do I do first? How do I begin? And let me tell you, the way that you begin this relationship with him, the way that you begin walking with him, is the same way you begin any relationship walking with anyone. You just walk up and say hi. You strike up a conversation. So I want you to stand. And then here's how we're going to do as we're going to close. I think it's who am I or who you am, or it's not who you am, but something like that. Who are you is what I was trying to say, but who am I? Whatever. Yams. I guess maybe I'm hungry. But here's what I want you to do. If you're the person who is walking to God, you come and hang out with him for a little bit, and then you go back to your life. You go back to your walk. Then I want you to begin today to walk with him. And that begins by moving from where you are. I'm going to tell you, it literally begins by walking. If you literally step out from where you are and walk towards an aisle, you're beginning those steps. Not just figuratively, not just spiritually, but literally. You'll be able to look back at your life and go, the day I started walking with God was the day I actually took a little walk. And it'll make a difference in your life. So if you're walking to, I want you to live a life that walks with. Step out and walk to an altar. Listen, every single one of us could do this. Every single one of us probably has moments where we step aside from God and go, hey, you keep up, I'll catch up in a minute. So don't feel like someone's going to look down on you because they think that you used to be a two, not a with. Enoch didn't care. So don't care either. Lord, we're just grateful for your love, your grace, your mercy. We're grateful for the way that you created us, God. You created us to have this relationship with you. Lord, you created us for fellowship. Lord, your own model, it says, let us make man in our image. Lord, from the beginning, there is this fellowship. There's this relationship. And Lord, that's the way that we're created to be. We're created for relationship. And Lord, we look for it in other places. We look for it in spouses and friends and groups that we belong to and organizations. We look to belong in so many different places. But the simple and obvious place that we're created to belong is with you. The simple and obvious place that we completely overlook is that we've been called and created to walk with you. That our best life, the life that has the purpose and the meaning and the direction and the fulfillment and the joy that we wanted in life, is not to walk the rat race that's around us, but to walk in step with you. And so, Lord, each and every one of us has this prayer where we say, God, forgive me for being a person who walks to you only. Forgive me for being the person who walked close to you to hear what you said and then to move on with my life. Forgive me for being the person who got just close enough to spend an hour with you and then said, I need the rest of the time to myself because there's things that got to get done. It's as if we don't realize that you care about us. that when we walk with you, that you'll stop providing for us. And Lord, I think we can look back at Genesis and see that that's the beginning of sin moving into the world. And the result was Adam and Eve didn't want to walk with God. So Lord, in this moment, we want to walk with you. And I want to show you that commitment by literally walking. So Lord, I come to you in this moment. Lord, I want to match my steps with yours. I want my walk to be I want your walk to be my walk. I don't want to step to the things of the world. I don't want to step to the things of myself. I want to step the way that you've called me. And then, Lord, as my companion, the way that you walk with me. So, Lord, we want to be Enochs. We want it to be said of us that we walked with God. He walked with God. 4 little words that summed up Enoch's life. What 4 words would you want summed up in your life? Husband, wife, father, mother, athletic, wealthy, kind, polite, neighbor, one of a kind, pain in the butt. What 4 words do you want said of your life? I would encourage you, of all the ones that you're thinking of all the things that are important to you, add walk with God as 3 of them. He or she, and you walked with God. It will not be an easy walk. There will still be stumbles and holes and rocks and immovable things along the way. But you'll walk with the God who says mountains can be moved. So really consider walk with God as being what the Lord said about you. Not just at the end of your days, but today. So go and have a great day. Have a great week. Walking with the Lord. See you next Sunday on site, online, 10 a.m. Dads, we got a little gift for you at the back table. Grab one and enjoy your Father's Day. Or don't grab one, but still enjoy your Father's Day.